Hello. So let's get started. So welcome to Tietoevry's webinar on payment card sustainability and collaborative card recycling with presenting Mastercard's view. My name is Tapio Vailahti. I'm a head of innovation and development in card personalization business unit of Tietoevry Banking. I have with me, and I'm very glad to have here with me Joe Pitcher from Mastercard, who is the global lead for sustainable cards.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and nice to meet you all.
So let's get started. Joe will be presenting himself briefly also when he's presenting. So, all right. So before we start with the topics, so let it be known that you can ask questions anonymously via the Q&A chat of this Teams Live, and these will be then used at the end of the webinar. This webinar is recorded, and you will be sent a link with this and also the presented slides by tomorrow. In the very end, there will be also a brief survey that is sent to you directly after webinar, so we would be very happy to have some feedback from you. In this webinar, there is a short welcome and introduction from Tietoevry side by me, and then the main substance is coming from Joe, and after which we have a 15 minutes of Q&A. Let's get started. Just in the very beginning, I'd like to mention that the payment cards are so much more than just the most popular means of payment today. The card is a token, it's a symbol, it's a relationship between the issuer and the consumer. It's a daily touch point. It provides means for brand recognition, sharing values, also differentiation against the competition, and it can also be a token of the customer appreciation. Also, from the consumer perspective, the card can present his or her values, her status, and so on, that he or she can then proudly show to his friends and family. And which then, at best of cases, can have a virtuous cycle of people then joining the said issuer. This is something that fintechs have been very good at doing, and there are famous examples of likes of Revolut, metal cards, and so forth. So card as a token, as a symbol. And that is important to mention that when we talk about the sustainability in payment cards, we have the sustainable raw materials. We can optimize the card life cycle from sustainability perspective. So in other words, doing the right thing. And that is something that banks, especially in the Nordics, have been quite proactive in doing. However, the thing that sometimes is not done in the best possible way is how to engage the card holders, communicating of your sustainable actions, engaging customers to do better in their life in sustainability. And it's of course something that you can have a good, an increased and improved brand recognition, your values presented in your marketing. Having a very brief look at the different card materials available as sustainable options, we have sort of a base option of using recycled materials, mostly PVC. You can then also use renewable materials not made of oil. So the example being the corn starch cards or sugar cards made of renewable material, and therefore not having the petroleum based there. And you can also make use of reclaimed materials collected from the ocean coastlines in countries where there is no proper infrastructure for collecting those other ways. So actually taking the plastic out of the nature. All these are good options from CO2 footprint perspective. And there are differences between vendors, between materials. But the question I would like to raise here is, which story would your customers prefer to learn from you on how you are marketing these, how you are making your actions known, and what you add into the card? Just as one example, looking at the Parley ocean plastic cards, which is addressing the plastic pollution in the oceans. And that's a very wide and good story to tell and share with your customers in case you opt for ocean plastic. But all these options are good options. As mentioned, the optimization of the whole card life cycle, this is mostly on top of the raw materials. It's the game of improvements throughout the life cycle. But then we are also today especially discussing the end of life, the safe disposal and recycling processes that are being looked into. On that area, Tietoevry has been active for several years now, looking at different options, working with local manufacturers of plastic products who could make use of the recycled materials, and also looking at different means of collecting the cards from the field, the expired cards from the consumers. We have looked into ATM network, we have looked into collection boxes, and also on return envelopes with the new card delivery as well. The challenge here is on how to make that wide enough, how to make it cost-effective enough, how to make it available for all Nordic countries and Baltic countries where we are clearly the biggest card provider on the payment card side. And here we then found out the great activities from Mastercard, and this is what Joe will be now discussing more in detail. So Joe, please go ahead.
Thank you, Tapio, and thanks again, everybody. I'm just going to briefly switch slides, so hopefully 1 second you will see my material. And just go back to my introduction. So I just said hi to you, Ed. I didn't really talk too much. I didn't want to spend too much time at the beginning, but just to give you a little bit of background about who I am. So in case you can't tell, I'm in the UK. I'm based out of a facility at Mastercard called DigiSec Lab, which is quite a unique facility as it is what I would call a proper chemistry department, a laboratory, where we perform a whole lot of different tests and research and analysis across a variety of products and settings, so that we can form our own view and opinion around a number of different products. Specifically, I'm responsible for what we call our Sustainable Cards program, and I'm going to talk to you and explain a little bit to you about what that program is, what it entails, and why we do it. But more broadly, I've been leading this work now for just coming up to 5 years. I've been at Mastercard for 12 years, but I've been involved in cards for 25 years now. So I've been around a little while. I used to manufacture cards once upon a time. I've worked for a number of large issuing banks. I've been a consultant. So hopefully I've got a pretty rounded view around card issuance and card technology that I try and bring together now to create what we call our Sustainable Cards program. The program itself today consists of 4 key pillars. I'm going to talk to you specifically and explain 3 of them to you today, but I wanted to give you the perspective. And I very deliberately said today has 4 key pillars. If we'd spoken a year ago, there'd have been 3 on this slide. And if I speak to you in 12 months' time, I would hope that there would be 5. Because the overall point of our program is we know we don't know everything. We know we're not at the end point, and we're constantly learning, constantly evolving, and constantly trying to redevelop what we do to ensure that we have the most comprehensive program available. But where we are today, there are these 4 key pillars. And I mentioned I'm out of DigiSec Lab. As we go through some of these slides, you'll see some of our lab work and some of the experience and expertise that we have that we really think bring this program to life and help it to be something more meaningful than just a PowerPoint and just a discussion. But in brief, these are the 4 key pillars that we have today, and it's almost a chronology. I won't talk too much about them at this point, but I'm going to come back to the majority of them and explain in more detail what they are. But the first part of my responsibility is I chair a group that Mastercard created called the Greener Payments Partnership, which is effectively our way of working with industry partners to collaborate, to understand the industry, the pros, the cons, the benefits, the issues, so that we can ensure when we talk about sustainable cards, we do it at an industry level. And the focus of all of my work is to drive industry change. We don't want to do one-on-one projects and pilots. We want to really affect change at an industrial level. The next three pieces are the pieces I'm going to focus on for the rest of this presentation. So in brief, we have what we call our Sustainable Materials Directory, which I will explain in a bit more detail to you. But effectively, it's if you like an A to Z, a directory of sustainable card products that are available to you. And it's already won some industry awards going back to July 2020. We have our additional certification program, which is our latest and most comprehensive level of testing, which again won an award back in 2021. And then we have our latest pillar, and the one that really I want to focus more on today, which is what we can do at end of life. So the majority of my work today has been about how we can make cards better, better materials, better processes. We're going to continue that work and continue developing that as far as we can. But what we recognise clearly is that just making a better card isn't enough. You've got to worry about what you do when that card expires. And at the moment, the default position around the world, when that card expires, you cut it up, you put it in the bin, and it goes to landfill or incineration, depending on where you are. We believe it can be better than that. And that's the latest piece of work that we're working towards. I'm going to go back to the materials directory now, and this has been the absolute foundation of all of our work and has led us to the position where we're in today, where we believe that we have a really strong proposition that's probably the leading in the industry. You can form your own opinions as we go through it as to if you've seen more and more in depth from other parties in the industry. But we believe the work we've done so far in creating this directory has really given Mastercard that leadership position. What the directory is a database of pre-tested, pre-approved Mastercard products that are available for issuers, for banks around the world to select from. So when you are considering moving to a sustainable card and you don't know where to start, you've got choices. You can pick up the phone to all of the different card suppliers that you may know, that you may have relationships with, and you can ask them, what do they have available? And they'll tell you what they have available. Or you can come to Mastercard and we can give you that independent view of what's available in your market from your current vendors, from alternatives, to really give you that independent agnostic view. But it isn't just a database of telephone contact details, it's actually real work behind it. So in order to get into our directory, those cards have to be really comprehensively tested and validated. And we do that in our lab here in the UK. The first thing we do when we start testing, you may or may not know, we already have a program called Card Structure and Integrity. Before any Mastercard that isn't 100% PVC, so Tapio mentioned the Revolut metal card, I'll use that as an example. Before Revolut, or before the vendor that produces that card is allowed to offer it to a Mastercard customer, it has to come to our lab in the UK for CSI testing. And what the CSI team do is they take those alternative cards, metal, biometric, PLA, ocean recovered, whatever it may be, and they run it through a series of standard ISO tests to ensure that those cards are as strong and robust as a standard PVC card. We have to do that testing because the definition of the ISO standard is this card is made from PVC. So as soon as you deviate from that, you're outside of the ISO norms. So what we do is basically run that ISO testing in-house to make sure that the card will bend correctly, will flex correctly, it doesn't delaminate. If you drop it, it doesn't shatter. Basically, we want to make sure these alternative cards are as good as a PVC card. And once our CSI team are satisfied that they are, it gets approved by the CSI team. And then in the case of the metal Revolut card, it can be offered to customers and sold out as a Mastercard product. That is the same for all non-PVC cards, again, whether they be metal, sustainable, biometric, whatever they could be. What I do, when my colleagues here, and this is Fernando who manages our CSI team, when Fernando's team have finished assessing the product, if they identify through their work that there's some type of sustainability claim around that product, then I start looking at it from my part of the lab. So I then take those approved products through and I do subsequent testing. This is really important. First of all, we have separation of duties here. So Fernando's team, CSI, evaluate and say, yes, that's a good product, it can be used, before I get a view around sustainability. That way, I only test sustainability products if we know they're actually good enough to be used. It would be wrong if I was to test a product and say, this is ridiculously sustainable, it's the best material we've ever seen, but it doesn't stand up to the CSI testing. So we do it in reverse. CSI pre-tests, pre-qualifies. Once they're satisfied, I then assess it from a sustainability perspective. The first thing I do when I do start to assess it after CSI have completed is I take it into my part of the lab and I put it underneath my scanning electron microscope. And this is the one that we have in the office. These aren't stock images, these are our lab equipment. So I prepare a sample, I put it through, set it in resin, diamond edge saw, prepare it so it's a nice, perfect, smooth surface, and then I run it underneath our scanning electron microscope. The images that you see on this particular slide I've just given as illustration so that you can help to understand the level of microscopic detail that we go to when we look at cards. So the image that you see on the left, on the sort of big block with the cables coming off of it, that's an EMV chip off the front of a card. That's the level of magnification we can get under our scanning electron microscope. This long white cable on the right-hand side of the slide, that's the bond wire connecting the chip to the contact plate. And in this little sort of snowflake, that's titanium oxide. So that's the material that goes into the plastic to make it look white. This hopefully gives you an understanding of the level of detail that we can actually get when we assess a card and the level of work we go to. The reason I actually use the scanning electron microscope will become clear, hopefully on the next slide. So you probably know when you look at a card, it isn't a single piece of plastic. It's multiple layers of plastic sandwiched together, laminated together. It has a chip, it has a hologram, normally has a contactless antenna these days, a mag tape, signature panel. It has many, many different aspects to it. And for me to just look at, here's a piece of plastic and assess it as being sustainable, I'd be missing the bigger picture. So what I need to do is analyze each individual aspect of that card, each individual layer. And that's where the scanning electron microscope starts to help me. So when I prepared my sample, I quite simply can put it underneath my microscope and start assessing how is that card put together. I've got two different samples on the slide here that have been annotated. Obviously, when I'm looking at it through the lens, they're not annotated, but this is done post-event. But what you can see visually, if we look at the sample on the left-hand side, you can clearly see there's at least two separate materials there. You can see that middle core looks different to the outer layers. You can also see there's at least 5 different layers, and you can see where they're glued together. So just by looking underneath the microscope, I can now say this card is made up of 5 layers. It's got at least 2 different materials in it, and I know the depths, the thickness of each individual layer. So I can work out, is it 50% one material, 50% another, before I then analyze what those materials are. And it starts to give me an understanding about how this product was made. Similarly, the product on the right-hand side, it's a different construction. You can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different layers in this particular product. And again, just by looking at the densities, you can see this sort of inner layer here is much darker than the outer layers, and again, the middle sandwich. So you can see just visually, there's at least 2 different materials. So again, when I'm starting to analyze it, I know I need to look in this case at 7 layers. In the previous case, I need to look at 5, but I can start analyzing exactly what these different materials are. So when I've used the scanning electron microscope to build my map, I now know what it is or what it is I want to look at. I don't know what it actually is at this point. So that's where my next tool comes into its own. And the next thing we use is our FTIR spectrometer. And effectively, this probe that you see on the right-hand side, normally I would have a nicely prepared sample, but it's easier for me to explain if I have a cross-section of a card. But I take a cross-section of a card that's been finely polished and smoothed off, place it underneath this scope, and this scope has to be run at basically minus 200 degrees in order to operate. So we cool it with liquid nitrogen. The probe itself, I can place on every individual layer of the card. So this is the screen from my FTIR. And you can see on this example on the left-hand side, I've placed the probe on 1, 2, 3, 4 different layers. And I've taken 1, 2, 3 different readings from each layer. So effectively, this probe is now going to give me 12 different read points of where it's actually analyzing the material. What the probe actually does is a chemical analysis, and it says where I am looking, the material I'm into contact with is made from this particular material. So in this sample I'm looking at here, it's saying it's a 98% match to our reference sample of PLA. So now I know if you're trying to source a PLA product from a vendor and they tell you it's a PLA product, I will look at each individual layer in that sandwich, whether it be 5 layers or 7 layers, however it's constructed, and I can then come back to you and say, every single layer in that card is PLA, or maybe the 3 internal layers are PLA and the 2 outer layers are still PVC from a lamination and a card finish perspective. I can give you that complete breakdown and view as to exactly how that card is made and from what materials. And again, when you're going to then offer your product as being sustainable to one of your customers, you want to market it in the correct way. You want to be able to be very, very clear to say, my PLA product is actually 60% PLA or 80% or whatever that true number is. Because the worst thing we can do when we talk about sustainability is give false claims towards customers. It's important that we're really, really clear and have clarification on exactly what we're stating. The purpose of our program is we can be that independent voice. So I always explain, I'm no mechanic. I don't understand how cars work, but I like to buy cars. If I go and buy a car and I just listen to the salesman, I'm just going to listen to what I'm told and I'm going to take his word for it. Sometimes you might take a mechanic with you. We can be that mechanic. We can offer that independent view and assessment to help reinforce your decisions. We've never encountered a situation where what the vendor has said has not been true. That isn't the point. We're not trying to catch people out. We're trying to give that assurance that what's happening in the market is certified, is standard, and can be trusted. The work that we've done there in our second step gives us a unique insight into the construction of a card. Nobody else tests the cards from a CSI perspective in the same way that we do, and nobody else tests it from a chemical perspective in the same way that we do. So we believe through that program, we already have the industry leading solution. But we also recognize that just looking at the piece of plastic isn't enough, and we wanted to do more. So a couple of years ago, we launched our next level of testing, which is what we call our CEC certification program. In step 2, we look at the card. Purely physically, we look at a piece of plastic, a device, and assess that. Now what we do after we finished assessing the plastic is we look at how was that card made? What was the factory process like? Was the vendor running on renewable energy? They're running in clean processes, so we can give a completely holistic view about how that card was created. So now, when you select a card product, this is currently optional. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment, but optionally, if your vendor has chosen to, they can submit to our CEC audit process. And once that's completed, they are provided a certificate, much like the one you see on the screen here. Obviously, this is just an example, but if you were to request from your vendor, your manufacturer, a copy of their certificate, they should be happy to share it with you. And it will have the manufacturer's name on it, the product name, the approved sustainability claim, so it's 80% PLA or 100% RPVC or whatever it may be. But specifically, it will also have the factory location. Because what we don't do is just say, this card has been made by vendor X, so it's approved to be issued and produced globally. We audit the specific factory. So we have specific factory level data. So if your cars are produced in China or in France or wherever they may be around the world, you should get the certificate relevant to that specific location. And that way we can give you the exact data for that product at that site. And then on the bottom piece here, we have the certified improvements. So what is it that we believe is making this card actually sustainable? The certificate is 2 pages. The second page looks a little bit like this. And what you'll see here is some of the data points that we've audited. So the way the process works is Mastercard doesn't check this. Again, it would be wrong of me to be the person that works with all of our partners around the world and basically mark their homework. They're, if you like, my friends as well as colleagues. I do not want to be in a position where people look at me and say, well, you've said that's good, you've said that's bad. So we've deliberately outsourced it to an independent auditor. So when a vendor takes part in this program, they work directly with an external auditor and they will exchange data around their factory, around their processes. Data points like how much energy does that factory use when it's producing one of these alternative cards? And then we have a baseline measurement that we've built up over years of experience of what the relative measure would be when you're producing a PVC card. So we can now say this particular factory, when they produce a PLA card, is using, in this made up example, 35% less energy. So it takes less energy to produce this PLA card than a standard PVC card. And that's based on audited data, not based on PR or any marketing. It's what we've actually seen evidence for. And we do then the same measurements for if they're using renewable or non-renewable energy. We look at how much material they use. Sometimes when you move to a new material, factory processes become less efficient while you're learning processes. We record that. It might be, again, that you have the most sustainable product, but if it takes you 10 times as much material effectively to produce that, that's an important piece of information for you to understand. And we do that for a variety of different data points culminating in a carbon footprint score. So ultimately, we can come back to you with this certificate. You can decide from the vendor selection of products which product is best for you. My role is not to say this is the best product, this is the one that you should choose. My role is to give independent thoughts, independent analysis of all of the products that are available, specify if they meet our criteria as being sustainable or not, and then provide that information to you so you can make your own informed decision. So I never sit here and say product X is better than product Y. All products have pros and cons. And to Tapio's point at the very beginning, one of them quite simply can be what resonates with your customers. If your customers are really concerned about cleaning up the oceans, as an example, some of these data points may become less important because the focus on the fact you're cleaning up the oceans is far more significant. If they're really focused on reducing carbon footprint, then this can be a really strong way to help you make that decision. So again, I'm not going to sit here and say best product, worst product. I'm going to give you information so you can make your own decisions. The work that we've done on this side so far has really culminated in the fact that we have now, as Mastercard, become the first network, if I'm allowed to call us a network still, to put out a rule that says from 2028, we won't allow first-use PVC cards on our network anymore. We do not believe there is any need to produce and issue cards solely made from first-use PVC. So anything manufactured that goes out of the door with a Mastercard badge on it from the 1st of January 2028 will need to be PLA, RPVC, ocean recovered, whatever other materials come out over the next 3 or 4 years. Again, what we don't do is dictate to the market, you must use these materials. Card manufacturers, vendors, we invite them all to do their own R&D, develop their own products. We support all of them. There will be some products that we don't qualify, and I can give you examples of ones that we already don't consider as being sustainable. Degradable, oxo-degradable materials, as an example, don't fit our remit. So there'll be products that we don't qualify, but we are not going to say you must use these materials. But effectively, from 2028, we have said no more first-use PVC. There's no need for it. All of that has been what I've been keeping myself busy with for the last 4 years, building that from sort of scratch to where we are today, to the point where it's now mature. There's still a long way to go before we have complete market saturation. But again, by 2028, we will have 100% market. What I'm now doing is shifting my focus a little bit more, while still keeping that maintained, to what happens at the end of life. Again, we can make fantastically sustainable products with material that we've cleaned up from the oceans that have got a really low carbon footprint. If we just throw those in the bin when they've expired, we're missing the bigger picture. So really what we all need to focus on now is what we can do at end of life. And my work so far has consisted of 2 key elements, one of which has been academic research. So we published a paper earlier this year that we co-wrote with the University of Manchester around chemical recycling techniques for plastics. And that was, for want of a better phrase, a piece of thought leadership work from Mastercard, where we've spent time and effort and money working with the university to develop and prove different ways of chemically recycling a payment card. And in essence, what we've proven is that if you take the right type of card, put it into a vat of chemicals as a complete unit with the chip, the antenna, the mag tape, the holograms, we can chemically separate all of those different components, take the plastic element back to its monomer forms, which if you like are the raw ingredients of the plastic, and then you can recreate completely brand new plastic. So that's something that is technically possible, but it isn't widespread. It isn't something that if you go to your local recycling company, they're going to have available. The reason we did that work is to show the art of the possible and to really show the direction of our thought, where we want to get to in the future. But we recognise that we need to deal with the here and now as well. So whilst we've done that, and I would hope to see some of these projects come into life over the next maybe 5 years or so, we've now got a solution for what we can do today. And this is where we believe all of us working together, collaborating in the right way, can really bring about change. And just looping back to the start of my presentation, I mentioned the GPP. The point of GPP is collaboration. The overall view about Mastercard, our testing, our certification is collaboration. All of us working together to deliver the maximum benefit in the most relevant and pertinent way. all of us working individually, and it's COP28 at the moment, and I think this is the same sort of theme at COP. If each country acts individually and does their own thing, we're never going to get to net zero. It takes collective action and collective agreement to really drive that forward. And that's our view when we look at things like sustainable cards and card recycling. So what I'm going to talk to you about briefly now is something that we've put live in the UK, and we're looking to advance further into more countries in 2024 and beyond. But at the moment, this is the model that we have live in the UK. When we looked at the UK market, we identified a couple of different options, and I believe these are true for most countries. There will be some variations across different markets, but the essence is the same. And what we identified quite clearly is that we as Mastercard could sit back and do nothing. We could say, right, banks, it's your problem, they're your cards, you go and clean up the waste and take care of it yourself. Some banks, one or two, and again, it's in the public domain, there's no secrets here. If you go on Google, you can see Santander, as an example, have launched a card collection and recycling program, which I fully support and endorse. It's fantastic that they have, but they've taken the lead and said, we're going to do it on our own. We're going to take the effort of doing RFPs, due diligence, onboarding a vendor, all of the cost, all of the relevant work to stand up their own program to collect their cards. We could sit back and say, do that, that's the way forward. But we believe doing that offers fragmentation. And ultimately, we might get a market like in the UK, where there's 2 or 3 individual banks doing their own small programs at the moment, but the vast majority of cards are currently not being collected. So we believe customer-led, yes, it's a viable option, but it's expensive and it's hard work for the person who does the issuer that takes that burden. A second theoretical approach, which we assessed, which we haven't actually seen live yet, could be where an independent third party, maybe a recycling company, identifies, again, I'm going to use the UK as an example, there's nearly 200 million cards in the UK. That's a lot of plastic that's going into landfill. A recycling company could sit there and think, that's a good opportunity for me to collect and to recycle all of that plastic. I know, I'll create my own program. And then the banks are disenfranchised. Mastercard, Visa, who I'll talk about in a moment, are disenfranchised. And we have an independent party who's going around the UK saying, give me your old bank cards, I'll recycle it for you. On one hand, you could say, fantastic, it's not costing me anything, it's not taking me any effort whatsoever. But do you really want your customers giving their card over to somebody who you have no commercial or legal relationship with? It's probably not the best solution. So as easy as it could be, we don't think that's viable. And what we've decided is that the best way to solve the problem of all of the plastic going into landfill and going into waste is by us all working together. So we call it a tri-party model. It's really a multi-party model. And what we've done in the UK is we formed a partnership with a particular vendor called TerraCycle, who are very well known in this particular space. And what we do is we've done all the due diligence, we've done the RFPs, the onboarding, all of the background work to stand up a program between Mastercard and TerraCycle that we now offer to the UK banks as a managed service, for want of a better phrase. So when a bank in the UK wants to collect their cards, they've got options. They can either go their own route, do their own thing, do their own due diligence, RFPs, contracts, all of that heavy lifting, do it themselves, fantastic. Or they can work with Mastercard, where we've done all of that for them, and we just offer it as a very simple go live. We can collect, we can recycle, we can do it all for you for effectively a nominal fee. The reason we've done it like this is twofold, and they're linked. The first one is to drive up volume. If we all work together, and I don't go bank to bank to bank to bank in the UK and maybe get 20%, 50% of the market, if we have our own program and I can offer it to all of the banks, I can potentially get 100% of the volume. That's optimistic. Not everybody's going to return their cards, but theoretically, I'm exposed to 100% of the volume. And then when I speak to my recycling partner, and I can say to them quite clearly, you don't have to go around bank to bank to bank to bank. You can come to Mastercard and we can work with you to deliver you 100% of the volume. That translates to they will offer me a better price, which I can then offer to the banks. So by driving up the volume, by working together, driving up the economies of scale, we can offer a most cost-effective solution. And what we've seen in other markets is when banks on their own have stood up their own card collection programs, they've usually, not always, but they've usually closed after a relatively short space of time. And the reality of it is, if you collect 5 million cards, from a Mastercard perspective, 5 million cards would be fantastic. You're a nice big bank and we're delighted to have you. From a plastics recycling perspective, they look at 5 million times 5 grams of plastic over a 12 or 24-month period. And that's not a lot for them. They want hundreds of millions. They want real volume that we can drive together. So by collecting all of that waste, driving up the volume, we drive down the cost, which makes it viable. So when banks have done it on their own, they're doing it at a premium effectively. And they carry the risk of, if I'm the only person collecting cards in a particular market, what's to stop somebody else putting their card into my box and I effectively have to pay to clear up their waste? Our solution, our program resolves all of that. And I did mention Visa, and I said I would come back to it. A really important point. If you want to come along to one of our UK collection points and put in a Visa card or American Express or China Union Pay or any other badge card, I'd be delighted. So we take all waste. The point of our program, again, is not to try and compete and not to try and say we're better than them and they're worse than us or anything like that. Our program is to try and help collectively at an industry level. So we welcome the collection of Visa cards, Amex cards, everybody else's cards. Ultimately, very, very simplistically, the way the program looks, this is just a mock-up. But what we do working with each individual bank is we help them design and build and install a collection point that can go into their bank branches. We also do it through different channels like mail rooms or return post. But the customer facing piece, if you like, would be a point looking a little bit like this. You can make it to your branding, your design, however you want to, but effectively the customer goes to the bank branch, the bank has communicated to them, they advised them what to do. They take their old card or cards. They may have multiple cards, again, from other banks, other schemes. Within the top of this unit, there's a small card size slot. Card gets placed in. As soon as it goes in, it is shredded completely. So there's no concern about data or privacy. The shredded card waste drops into this internal collection box. And then once that box is full and the branch staff can notify our recycling partner, the recycling partner quite simply comes along, collects that box, takes it away, recycles the contents. This is not a complicated solution. The only clever piece about our solution is that we're trying to drive it collectively for everybody to get involved, drive up the scale to make it successful. It's not complex collecting rubbish and recycling it from this perspective. So what we're just trying to do is ease those barriers to make it even easier for everybody to join the program. I mentioned the shredder, and I'm just going to show you one more slide, and then I think I'll begin to wrap up. But it's really important that when customers do place their cards in a collection point, that they can be sure that there's no data or privacy concerns. So this is an example. You can see obviously here is a solid card. This is the same type of card once I put it through my shredder. And I actually did count it. I had a quiet day in the office, and you'll notice that there's 265 pieces. So each card is shredded into approximately 265 pieces that are less than a centimetre by about 2 millimetres across. There's absolutely no way anybody is going to get any of the data from that card. And it's really important we do it to this degree because there's two threats. There's real threat of real fraud and people actually stealing money, but then there's perception of threat as well. If a cardholder is worried that somebody might compromise my data, they're not going to put it in the box. I wouldn't. And that's, again, why we don't have the model where we have an independent party collecting it. It's branded through Mastercard. It's Mastercard are collecting your cards. Mastercard are taking ownership of it. And by the way, you can see how small your card is now, so there's no threat of any data. And finally, and I'll hand back to Tapio after this particular slide, at the end of life, what do we do with the waste? Well, today, it's simple. We're building a program. We're starting at the very, very basic steps. There's no point me coming in on day one saying we need to do chemical recycling straight away. What we need to do to begin with is educate customers that there is a program. And as we educate and more people get on board, we can refine the recycling. So what we do in essence today is the recycled cards, the waste products, are turned back into PVC pipes for plumbing, building industry. We take the metal from the chip to turn it into nuts and bolts. We can resmelt it. It may be that a particular customer wants to take away some of the waste to say, actually, I want to do a community project. I'd like to create a park bench or a children's play area to go back to the community. That's also a possibility. And what we're currently working on is something a little bit more ambitious about getting to the point where we can take that expired card, the recycled waste, and turn it back into new cards and really have that circular approach. Again, there's a story. Nothing is ever fixed. So again, I started off by saying I have 4 pillars today. Last year I had 3. Next year I'll have 5. It's the same approach to recycling. We know what we're doing today isn't perfect, but we know it's a very, very good step towards perfection. And we want to keep stepping forward and keep improving as we go. So hopefully that's giving you a flavour about the Mastercard Sustainable Card Programme, specifically the recycling element, but overall our philosophy about collaboration, working with partners, working at an industry, at a country level to really drive scale and drive these solutions forward. So thank you for listening. I'm going to pause now and hand back to you, Tapio.
Very good. Thank you very much, Joe, not only of this presentation, but what you have done. So very much appreciated. Let me share now my screen. So here we go. So there we have a couple of questions from different channels. Let me start from the ones from the chat. Let's start with the latest one. How to destroy or recycle metal card on cardholder level if collection boxes are not available, of course, making the obvious point that shredding metal cards might be a bit hard.
Yeah, so I can tell you from our experience at the moment, so metal cards are outside of the scope of our program. And that's mainly, to be perfectly honest, because the volume of metal cards don't justify standing up a collection program purely for them. If an issuer has a volume of metal cards they want to collect, we have solutions that we can work with them towards. But your typical solution of walking into a bank branch, putting the card into the slot to shred it, obviously wouldn't work. And I can speak from experience because one of my colleagues in the US, I've got one of my units in our head office to demonstrate to internal colleagues. Somebody tried to shred a titanium card, and strangely enough, it didn't work. So at the moment, we don't offer off-the-shelf collection of metal cards, but if it was something that was wanted, our partner could process it. So it is an option.
Right. Good. Then looking at the other question from the QA chat. I guess you have a little bit touched this already, but just for new. So when it comes a day when all Mastercard worldwide cards are made of sustainable material, what then? So it's not all work is done, but what do you see in future?
So first of all, absolutely. And we're already having those discussions about, obviously, what do we do when we've migrated all cards to being sustainable? And I guess there's two answers to that. I mentioned I've been in cards for 25 years. I've spent the majority of those 25 years working on EMV, on chips. We don't have chips on all of the cards around the world yet. We still have mag tape. We still have embossed numbers. There's these legacy technologies that will continue to exist. And I believe the plastic card will still be a legacy technology that will still exist, probably after I've retired. However, we do obviously have digital, mobile, all these different online payment methods that we're obviously developing and enhancing. And there will become in time where you no longer use a physical card. It's a digital only payment. But personally, I believe that's going to be 20, 30 years down the line. It's going to keep growing and keep taking up a larger number of the market. But what we're absolutely fixed on doing is, while plastic cards exist, reducing the impact in whatever way we can and making them as environmentally friendly as we possibly can.
Yeah, and of course, we agree fully on this payment card future, in the sense that the card numbers per person are still growing in Europe. So it's still
Absolutely.
a growth area. Then looking at the card collection, so you mentioned about this collaborative model that you have now using in UK as in a pilot, and also mentioned that the bigger the volume, the lower the costs are. But then the banks have also been having their own schemes on how to collect and recycle. What is basically the attitude from banks? Has it been surveyed, and with what results?
Absolutely, yes. So using the UK example again, and we've done research in a number of different markets, but the one that's most relevant is the UK. As Mastercard, we have a number of different customer forums, and we have a UK customer forum, which is held by our head of UK, and different groups are invited to present and speak to all of our UK customers. I went just over a month ago, and I spoke to effectively every bank in the UK in the same meeting room. And I was going to say pitched, I didn't sell it. I explained our program to all of the UK banks, and it was unanimous in that room that this is the right way to go and that all of the UK banks want to join. It doesn't mean they all will tomorrow. So I don't want to say that I'm suddenly going to have every bank in the UK. It takes time and it takes effort, and people work on their own timescales. But the feedback was clear that the only way for this to really work is for everybody to collaborate and work together. And for us to take this as an individual competition point ultimately is what's going to cause the downfall of it, because then we're competing over who's collecting the rubbish. And I don't think collecting rubbish is something that we should really compete over. We should just all be doing it.
Right. And also, of course, the perspective looking from the Nordic Baltic perspective, which are not that, let's say, the volumes are relatively low. So, of course, I would say that here it is even more important that we are working in collaboration.
Absolutely. And to help that even further, precisely to your point, it may be, and again, I keep talking about the UK because that's the live example. The UK is a relatively large market. For some smaller markets that are very close geographically, if we have the right conditions, legislation, transportation, it may well be that we can put out a hub solution, if you like. So it might tackle 6 or 7 markets and ultimately pull all of that together to deliver, again, the real benefits of the scale and the cost benefits that we're looking for.
And of course, that brings us to the next question, which is about the cost. So who pays whom, how much? What can you say about that at this point of time?
Sure. So costs, quite simply, will vary per country, because if we look at one of the important cost elements is transportation, and the costs that it takes me to drive a lorry up and down the UK as opposed to across Norway or the US is going to vary. So I can't say today it's going to cost exactly this amount in each market. What I can say is that Mastercard bears the cost. So we pay directly to the recycling partner. And then what we do is relay the cost relevant to each individual bank. So if Bank A, as an example, has a portfolio of 2 million cards, we would build into a contract with them a maximum fee that would cover the collection and recycling of 2 million cards. What we would actually bill them at the end of each 12-month period is for the volume of cards that was actually collected, which is going to be 2 million minus. So we build in a structure to say we will cap it, you will pay for what you're responsible for and what you collect. And if we were to try and equate it to an approximate cost, we're talking a couple pennies, euro cents per card. The whole point of our program is to drive the cost as low as possible. Mastercard isn't doing this to drive revenue. We're doing it to enable the program. And if we look at it as a very, very simplistic point of view, if you go to the supermarket and it's the weekend, so you buy yourself a packet of beers, 4 cans of beer. If you buy 4 packs of beer, 4 cans together, it's much cheaper than if you buy 4 individual cans. It's that very, very simple philosophy where we're going along and saying to the recycling partner, do you want to buy all of this waste? Or do you want to go around unit to unit to unit? And by doing that, we've driven that cost all the way down to as low as it can possibly go. And now what we're doing is just passing back the fair cost to the person responsible, the owner of that card. And we're not taking any revenue in the middle. We're just enabling that transfer.
That sounds fair, but of course, the devil's in the details. So that's interesting to hear more about it. Then the question about the different card materials. We talked about the different sustainable card material options. Can they also be recycled?
Yeah. So all of the plastics, so for all plastic can be recycled. It's as simple as that. It's just making sure you have the correct process to recycle it. Today, if I look globally, 90%, still 85 to 90% of all cards globally are still first use PVC. That number is changing rapidly, and as we get towards 2028, it will have transformed completely. But in reality today, the vast majority of cards that we collect are going to PVC. So we have optimized our solution to recycle PVC. If we collect 10% PLA and 5% HDPE or whatever, or contaminants, for want of a better word, they can be managed within our process. So we can still collect all of those cards. They can all still go into the same unit. Our partner can process that and separate them out. If we get to a point in the future where a particular country has migrated and now it's 100% PLA in Norway, as an example, then we fine tune our recycling process to say, okay, we expect PLA and we will treat the PVC or the HDPE as the contaminant. So all cards can be accepted. And depending on exactly what the mix is, we will fine tune the recycling to cater for that.
And that is, of course, very important for the Nordic region, especially because we have actually quite a big, let's say, range of PLA cards here. being
Absolutely.
starting this year.
And the piece of our program that is uniform is the method that we're trying to implement and the education that we're trying to implement. And to your point, the population's growing, the world is growing. What we're trying to do is teach 6-7 billion people you can return your card, it can be recycled. So it's putting those building blocks in time. The real fine tuning of the recycling at the back end is almost the incidental. It's massively important, but if we don't get people to participate in the first place, it becomes redundant. So it's all about the education and making it available to people and making it easy for people to join in and take part.
Right. Are there other means of collecting the cards than collection boxes? So are you entertaining the other options as well?
Absolutely. So in branch is, I would say, the preferred approach, but that's preferred based on the research that we've done. We are currently testing in the UK also return envelopes. So when your card is replaced, you send out an envelope with the card or mailing address. The card is returned back to a centralized location, collected, recycled there. So that is an option. Other markets, we aren't actively doing it, but it could be an option for ATM collection. The reason we're not actively doing it is we don't manage the ATM network. That's managed by the individual banks typically, or the processor within that market. So I can't sit here today and say, use the ATM because I don't have any influence on it. However, if somebody came to me saying, we want to use our ATMs, then that's a perfectly valid option as well. We're also exploring other options, maybe partnering with a supermarket, so that we don't necessarily have to say, go to your bank branch, and there's 5 bank branches in the town. It might be, go to your supermarket, and everybody goes to that one point. So the in-branch is the off-the-shelf solution, but we do have these others in play as well.
Very good. Coming back to the materials, how, in your experience, how frequently are the different card manufacturers updating their eco-certificates? Is that an annual process or?
Yeah, so from a Mastercard perspective, the step 3 on my presentation, the card eco certification, when we first launched it, the certificates were valid for 1 year. We've recently made an update to say the first time we certify you, it will be valid for 1 year. And then when we do a renewal at the end of that 12 months, if we can see that the processes are in place and that we can really trust that the vendor understands how to participate and how to collect the data, we will then issue a 2-year certificate. So our process is either 12 or 24 months, depending on the status of each individual vendor. We don't believe doing it for longer than that makes sense because factory processes change, energy suppliers change, all these different components, material supply may change. So we could issue a 5-year certificate and it'll be nice and straightforward. But by the end of that 5 years, you might start questioning the validity of it. So for now, we've gone 12, 24 months. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll see if that needs to be adjusted in the future, but that's the process we're using today.
Right. You mentioned in the beginning that you are testing all the cards according to ISO specifications for the materials that are not PVC. Yeah. Do you have any experience about how good they are compared to PVC?
Yeah, so I guess the starting point of our CSI testing is they must be as good as PVC. So our assumption is that through our testing, in order to qualify for CSI, you must be as good as PVC. If we have an edge case, so material that doesn't quite make the mark, if there's a strong enough business case, use case for it, then we can grant it under almost a variance process. So the default solution is it must be as good as PVC. But if I take a live example, we're now seeing cards that are made out of wood. So you'll see it in the news. Again, it's not anything secretive. Wood obviously doesn't bend and flex in exactly the same way as plastic does. So we're working with the vendors, the manufacturers, to get it as close to the requirement as possible. And if it's not quite there, we will allow that to be used under limited conditions, restrictions, variances, so we can learn more about it. So we try and get them to be as good as PVC. 99% of the time they are. But if somebody comes along with a new product that they're still developing, still manufacturing, then we can allow a variance to enable that to actually be launched as well.
Very good. I think we are closing the end of the webinar. So thank you very much, Joe, for your insight.
Thank you.
Really deep dive on with spectrometers and all that. It should make people understand that you are seriously looking into this. And I thank you also, Mastercard, for being the front runner in this area of sustainability. That's very important. I would say even more so in this Nordic-Baltic region that is our home turf, but also outside where we also are serving our customers, increasingly so. Also mentioning that currently, when it comes to cards that we deliver, it's about 75% of cards are made of sustainable materials already here in the Nordics. We value your opinion, so we are now sharing a link for a quick feedback from this webinar. So if you can please answer to that in the remaining few minutes that is still left here. And also just to mention again that links to this recording and to the PDF slides will be sent to you by tomorrow. So I thank you very much, and let's be more sustainable. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Tapio. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.